Hi there, I'm Peter Beck with SGK North America Brand Experience. Couldn't be more excited to share an amazing event, an amazing journey that we've been on for some time, where we're bringing together some of the greatest talent around the world. Not just amazing talent, but wonderful people that are inspired daily to create moments that matter, moments that mean something, moments where consumers say thank you on a digital platform throughout a physical environment, in creating an incredible connected consumer journey. Really excited to share more today. Introduce you to a number of my teammates. Across this event, you'll hear our approach, you'll hear our beliefs, challenges we've run into, shifting consumer behavior, and how we believe we can solve those problems, bring greater value to you, our clients, and certainly as we look into bringing greater value to the marketplace. So optimistic and excited for our future. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. I hope you enjoy the events and really look forward to speaking with you soon. Take care.
We're here today in SGK's Portland studio to talk about two really different brands and projects that we've had the privilege to work on. Nike's Giannis Zoom Freak 1 and General Mills' The Cereal Man. We'll go into the scope, the creative, and the execution for each, and then we'll put them head to head.
We just pulled up in Nike SoHo. Let me show you guys around.
So now we've seen some context behind this project. Let's start by talking about Giannis, the athlete behind the shoe. So why was Nike interested in partnering with him? What's his story?
Yeah, at the time, Giannis was like a little bit of an unknown. He was about to break out. This was like his first season where he was about to be the MVP and he was kind of about to break on the scene. So they timed it really well. It was also the first time that Nike did a signature shoe with an international star. So this is kind of a play to go global as well as just tell a Giannis story. He's an immigrant from Athens, so he's got this great background, great story to tell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really humble, family guys. Cool story for them.
Mm-hmm. Plays for Milwaukee.
He does play for the Bucks, so he's a little bit of an unknown. So this is kind of like his breakout moment on the scene.
And so how was SGK brought into this project? What was our first interaction with the client about it?
Yeah, so our relationship with Nike and the Nike basketball team goes back, I think we like to put it in context of it was just the LeBron 18 was the last launch, and SGK has been a part of all 18 of those launches. So our relationship with Nike basketball goes really far back, and we're really pretty integral in their campaign launches. This conversation around Giannis's launch actually first came up on an install for another project. It was the KD that spring, but they were just excited about the launch. As Tim said, he was just really having a great career, set up to be the MVP. It was his first signature launch. It had been a while since they had kind of a signature launch on the Nike basketball brand, so just a lot of excitement around it. So we kind of started talking about it early, but then the actual formal brief came in, weeks later.
And when you got the brief, what did the scope of work look like?
So we were asked to do full service, so design, seeing all the way through the execution and installation at 5 retail locations. So there's 2 in Los Angeles area, 1 in Chicago, and then 2 in New York, and 1 in Harlem, and then SoHo being really the pinnacle of the execution.
And so knowing that we were really focused on highlighting the New York market, can we talk a little bit about what the creative approach was specifically for that SoHo store?
Yeah, when we dive into SoHo specifically, we're always trying to tell a deeper story than what we get from a general visual center with Nike. And what it looks like is finding some kind of connection to the New York market, making people in New York care a little more. It's just like one of the pinnacles of retail. So it's like you have to go a little deeper. You have to make that consumer care a little more to get any kind of interest. And what we landed on was, after a number of directions and a number of possible leads, we settled on this immigrant story of looking at Giannis's neighborhood in Athens and connecting that to Astoria, Queens. And what we found after some research was that Astoria, Queens has one of the highest populations of Greek immigrants in the whole United States. And that consumer base had opened something like 600, 700 diners in the area. And so we kind of landed on this like Astoria to Athens. We eventually settled in on a coffee shop. And that was kind of the connection that made the most sense with this Greek hospitality and what was very authentic to the people and might be authentic to New York, and how we could tie that all together.
And so as you're visualizing this space and, you know, sketching it and putting it on an iPad, how do you think about it actually coming to life in a real 3D space? Like, what does that process look like in bringing it to life?
I think what you're trying to do is come up with a concept people will care about. And once you kind of land that, then the magic sort of happens, where you go from a doodle of a cup to a full coffee shop that's being built in space. And how that comes to life is a lot of times through the details. And it's taking something that New Yorkers know and love every day, which is this Greek coffee cup, and then owning it from a Nike perspective and owning it from a shoe launch perspective, and making that cup Giannis's cup.
I think once we nailed down that concept, like the rest of it became really fun, trying different things from the neon and the signage that you see outside diners. Can we create a diner? Should we bring in tables? Like, is that our only concept? And then it just kind of evolves from there. And then I think another thing that's important to note is that, you know, we are rooted in production. So alongside with Tim, you've got someone who actually is going to help see this thing get built. So how do we think about all those details as we're coming up with these ideas and concepts, and really just thinking of it holistically so that we can bring it to life when we get to that point?
We take it from the sketch, and then pretty soon we're looking at how tall does the bar need to be? What kind of faux marble are you using for this tabletop? How wide is the
real are we
awning?
going to make it?
How deep can we go?
Yeah.
How fun can we make it? How authentic can it feel?
And to starting to visualize and bring to life things like a material of a Greek column, you know, all of the detail that goes into finding the right finish and, you know, staying true to the creative intent to it, but having to actually have it be a durable thing that people are going to interact with in a store.
When you are looking at this concept from Athens to Astoria, you have to be true to Athens. You have to hit that marble finish that feels right, that feels like a historic column, but then you also have to bring it into Astoria and feel like, how has this community translated their culture on this city, and how do we tap into that, and how do we replicate some of those things and pull some of those elements, but then also hit it with a Giannis spin and make it feel very modern.
Let's not forget too, like, how do we also integrate product? And like, we're telling a story about his shoe as well, and we're, you know, telling his story. So there's just so many layers to this to really get it right. I think it was just making sure we're thinking through all of that and really looking at approach.
It's kind of the difference of like putting a shoe on a shelf versus like building an environment that the shoe can live in, that feels authentic and people can experience. Right. And that will kind of make them feel better about their purchase as well. Like, I can come into this store, I can experience this coffee shop, I can go to the back, I can see the barber shop, I can get my hair cut, and I can kind of feel this environment living through the whole process, and then maybe that convinces me, this is the shoe I need.
You find nuggets of New York, of Giannis, and, you know, of all of these different stories kind of all coming together. And that was, I think, what was so incredible about this project, is it was a really unique, a guy who's playing basketball in Milwaukee, from Athens, Greece, and in New York. How do those three things come together and experience it feels real to a consumer and makes the consumer excited to be there, right?
I think that aha moment was the coffee cup.
Yeah.
It was the easiest thing. Like, that, as soon as the team saw it, and like to take New York's coffee cup and make it Giannis's coffee cup, because it really is a Greek cup anyway, that story became really easy. That was the anchor for the concept that then became Athens to a story, which also is really beautiful. It rolls off the tongue. It's an easy sell. Like, the strategy of selling a concept also is really part of the concept.
And it seems like a simple concept, but making those mental connections is actually a much more in-depth process than it might seem.
Like saying, we're going to put a coffee shop in your store. That's not the pitch. Right?
That sounds simple now.
For a basketball launch.
It was really interesting. Going back to what you said early on, we've done every LeBron launch. So 18 years of LeBron launches. Giannis was, you know, that same time. A year, like LeBron's first shoe, if we look at what we did in the market, and this just shows how marketing has evolved and how retail's evolved, but really the key was probably different retailers and being as consistent as we can with a banner, maybe a pedestal, maybe something on our footwear wall, and that was a win. And if we could do that across the country and look the same in every single store, that's what you're judged against. Fast forward to Giannis, it was the exact opposite. How do you do something in New York that is disruptive, that resonates with the New York consumer, not just New York itself, but one of the 5 boroughs, they're all different. The boroughs interact different consumers, that then resonates and allows you to have the ability and freedom for New York to let you in. That's really what it is New York allowing you to come in and tell a story that's gonna resonate and align with them. So I think we talk about how easy the Astoria to Athens story became, but it really wasn't. There was a lot of research and time thinking about how to do that and do it in a way that's organic. And then where if someone from Astoria came in, or someone from Athens came in, they would not feel like it was fake or false or wasn't aligned with actually their tradition and culture. So really interesting to get there. But I think just that tie of in 18 years, how much marketing has changed, and what we see as a barometer of success now is that, not consistency in the market, because LA and New York are also different.
It's really fun from a design time as well to be in this place. Like we're not doing the same thing in every market. So like we get to dive into SoHo and flesh it out and say, okay, Giannis is coming here. What do we want to do with this neon sign? We know we're doing this Greek diner 34/7, and that's his number instead of open 24/7. Like the spins on the coffee bag, taking this Antetokounmpo brothers coffee and making it feel like an actual coffee brand. We get to build out our own little mini Giannis coffee.
We're essentially extending the Nike brand through the product into kind of creating our own brand in a coffee shop.
Exactly. And I think that's something that we wouldn't have been able to do for LeBron 1. Like everyone wanted the LeBron 1, the shoe, the graphic, it all came out the same in every location, whereas we get to really dive into these fun design nuggets, this fun background he has, and really make people connect a little deeper with him, hopefully sell more.
So let's kind of dig into this a little bit and talk about what some of those specific challenges were.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with just timeline. Talking SoHo and the 4 other locations, I think our total timeline was 6 weeks from starting concepting all the way to seeing this thing built. So really tight timeline in terms of, again, getting from an idea to actual real life execution. So I think Tim having, again, that partner who's, how are we gonna build it? How are we gonna get ahead of all of these details and things like that really helped us execute what we could to be able to do the finishes and all the important stuff that really made it real in space in a really short, condensed timeline.
It really is that timeline challenge and layering and then that New York story authentically. I think those are those two things to go deeper, to be deeper, to tell a better story. It does take more time. It does take more effort, and you're landing that late at night. You're working late. You're drinking a lot of coffee. Maybe that's how we got there. I don't know.
That was the coffee.
Yeah, that's
how you had that aha moment, drinking a cup of coffee late at night.
It's definitely a sprint, not a marathon. I mean, it's just a product of Nike, but it's a product of the market. We have to be able to respond to consumers as quickly as we can in the most real time. So 6 weeks is a ridiculous timeline, but it's just the way that it needs to be and the way that we have to interact. So what we've done is just become smarter in how we work. We've got team members that can sit with Tim that are looking at material specs and finishes that are available in market that we can get on, that Tim can then adapt in his design. That's then working with a project manager who's then talking to our shops and other things. So when you build a team around that, you have to be real nimble and real quick, but you have to be all in for 6 weeks of just run at it and attack it. And then back it with a story that we care about, because you created it pretty much from the ground up. Now there was a VC, but where we ended was different. The energy is not a hard thing to find.
It is like the partners here that make it happen. Like everyone, all these teammates, we work with a 3D team that's visualizing. So like the design team's coming up with loose ideas, loose concepts, taking those into space. Like how does the coffee shop work in the space? Like what does that look like? So we have these great 3D partners. We sit with a development team that then builds out. We know the column's gonna be marble. Let's get 12 marble samples going. Let's see what the column could be. Let's see what the tabletop is. How do we match a blue vinyl on an awning to a blue paint finish? Is it a matte? Like these are all like the small details that in a 6-week timeline become really key. If you miss one in the process, then your input just isn't at the level it needs to be.
It's real-time prototyping because that's the only way to do it.
Yeah.
And not to mention that, everything that we're putting in this space people are going to be touching and seeing up close and interacting with. So you can't fake it. It can't, look nice, but the second you touch it, it's going to fall apart. It has to be really authentic and done well.
It's Nike and it's SoHo. If if you're gonna do something like this, you've got to do it right.
Yeah, New York will call you out. For
you can't fake it there.
Call bullshit real fast on your stuff.
So can we talk about what the most impactful moment for you was throughout this whole process?
I got to be on site for the install and to see everything come live. For me, it was the day after we had installed everything and just getting to see consumers interact with the space. I think I walked into the store and saw, people sitting at the cafe tables with their Nike bags and coffee cups and just interacting with every single one of our moments, which is exactly, what we could wish for and what we hope for. And then going to buy a shirt, I was promised him I'd get him the Zoom Freak 1 t-shirts, and they were already sold out. So, sell-through was incredible at the store. Again, everything you can ask for an installation like this.
Yeah, and I did not get to go. So I was watching from home. Instagram had just come out with the live feature. So I was experiencing it basically from a Giannis perspective, which was kind of crazy to see. This guy who's got his first shoe launch, and he's just like geeking out about all the details. He's got his phone, he's flipping it from his face to the environment. He's like showing all his viewers. There's thousands of people like watching this live. Him and his 2 brothers are there, and they're all going live. So you've got these 3 brothers all super excited about the details. They're looking at the menus. They're checking out the coffee bags. They're like, oh, it's not just Giannis on here. It's the brothers. Like, we're all in here tying back to the colorway. And then they're starting at the front of the store taking pictures, and then they go back to the Coming to America section with the barbershop, and they're fake cutting their hair, and like getting to see that and experience that live with fans who are all reacting, and like seeing people throwing hearts out, throwing fire emojis. It's cool to just like experience that, which you don't usually get to see an athlete go to your space and then be excited about it. Because usually, these athletes, they're into sports. They're not promoting their shoes is their thing, isn't always their thing, but this was the first time for Giannis. So like, this wasn't the LeBron 15. This was the first time. So he's kind of living this Coming to America dream in real life. He's in New York. He's launching a shoe. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think we talk about wanting to get the materials and the details right to really create an authentic story. And what better way to know that we did than to see him himself like walk through it and experience it and be that excited about what we've created and want to take it home with him, that you've really nailed what you're trying to create in that space when you see consumers, let alone the consumer that this is, built around, experience it the way, you intended.
And loved it. I mean, that's the
it,
final
yeah.
test, right? I mean, he could have live streamed that and been like, well, this is a little bit off from how it really is, but none of that happened. And it was because all the care you put into the details. It's really exciting to watch. For sure, I watched it as well. But.
And of course, the numbers matter, right? Sell-through is important, and you want to make sure that the product's moving off the shelves. But we can't ignore just the power of social media and Giannis walking through the space and sharing that with all of his followers and the people that are his fans. Let alone the people in store that are taking pictures and sharing with their own networks. Like, that's how you can extend that moment from the SoHo store into the sneaker culture across the world.
Right. Create someone who's going to go get the Zoom 2, the Zoom 3, the Zoom 4, and so on, right? Just continue to build that brand love.
It felt like a really natural extension of the evolution of retail too. Like, him doing that on Instagram Live as it came out as like a moment that like set up the tone for a lot of what we're doing with social influence and paid media now, but it was so authentic and so natural. It was like him living his dream come true in that space that we helped make that happen for him. I mean, it was, again, like resetting the bar and seeing what that expectation is from that consumer, and that aha moment was him having that moment.
Great.
It's something we plan for in
Totally
everything we do now. At that time, we planned for, 2019, we knew the power of harnessing social, knowing that everything that we do, there needs to be the ability for it to be shareable. But now more than ever, we've learned from that one, to use those tactics in a little bit more strategic way when we're talking about omni-channel approaches for if we were to do Giannis 2, Giannis 3, Giannis 4, whatever, as it goes through. But yeah, that raw, organic shareability, I don't know if we're gonna have that again from an athlete who was willing to do that on their own and was excited, and it didn't feel forced.
We definitely raised the bar on ourselves when it comes to consumer experience. But.
And getting to see that work as an example. So like we were on a brief just a couple days ago with some new clients we'd never worked with, and we got to see Giannis as a shining example of something that was very successful and had staying power within the walls of Nike as a success.
Shifting away from Nike, let's talk about General Mills. So very different brand, very different initiative, but we can still apply some of the same thinking. So General Mills is a very different brand from Nike. Why are we talking about them?
We met them through Nike, which is, it's kind of fun to be comparing a little bit these two projects, but we had a collaboration about a year ago on some Kyrie Wheaties projects. So got our foot in the door, and then really they're a really interesting brand right now. They are seeing the power of trying to target younger consumers, the power of thinking consumer first and building brands, and really have pivoted their internal marketing strategy to be really experience-based. Have that be physical or digital or a mix of both, as we all know. So really interesting in their CPG. It's different than Nike, of course. It's not a product that LeBron wears, but it is a good you have in your house and you're gonna buy, and there's some brand love around them and some really interesting stories that have been developed for many years around these brands. So really excited to get to where we got to and have this really fun project that we landed.
Yes, let's talk about this project. What story were we asked to tell here?
The A was fun with General Mills, with B was Got Milk. Like, really exciting to talk about Got Milk. We all have grown up with some of that storytelling or have experienced it in our own way via some old print campaigns or seeing celebrities with a milk mustache. So they came to us with this idea that they had a partnership. General Mills, Got Milk, gonna do a collab that's gonna go to market. They're gonna do something on pack. A really cool, kind of tongue-in-cheek. They put the milk mustache on some of their characters on the box. But other than that, didn't really know what they wanted to do. So they called us in. It's a great relationship we have with them that's very open, and we're able to just kind of push the boundaries. So hopped on a call and said, what would that look like? How would we announce this? How would we unpack this partnership? How could we have some fun with it while thinking differently and disruptive, as well as trying to target Gen Z? And then from there, we had a call and we talked through it, and we started going down the concept path.
Seems like a pretty blank slate for a brief, which is kind of unique for us and really fun. Yeah. What did that approach look like? When you're coming at it with not a whole lot to go on, how do you develop a strategy and an approach for a partnership like this?
Quickly. On a half-hour phone call, usually. I think we did it several times for them with some of the Wheaties campaigns, for Mills Galaxy with Star Wars. They are coming to us with these great product collaborations, great brands, great crossover, great key art on pack. Then they look to us for the experience. So there really is a limited brief usually. Here's what they're doing, and then as subject matter experts, they look to us to come back to them with what they should be doing. And so usually that conversation just happens on the phone call, which would be a brief. It's a couple quick ideas, throwing them out, you're seeing if they stick, and we go from there. It's very conversational. We've earned the trust over the last couple projects. It's a really nice working experience to kick these projects off. So that's usually how we do it with them.
And what was the concept? What did we come back to them with? Where did we land on that initial call?
Luckily, we had the great DNA and the great blueprint from the existing Got Milk commercials of the past and poster campaign, and really one of the iconic commercial initiative campaign launches of a generation, from the video content to the poster series, which we kind of imagine as one of the first social campaigns before social media. So using that as the blueprint, our strategy was then to update and modernize that. Basically, make a piece of content that would kick it off, that would generate the buzz and the hype. Then once that was done, use basically the poster and billboard campaign of the milk mustache in a new way that would attract a new younger generation of social media, but with the same kind of one-to-one thinking that would respect its heritage and nostalgia, but to a totally new consumer through new technology and new storytelling and innovation. And that's so how we come up with the cereal.
What are those tactics? How did that actually execute once you knew that you wanted to kind of bring that nostalgic element into it and find that one-to-one comparison?
Yeah, I don't want to understate it either. I mean, on the call, within a couple of minutes, we started talking through it, and I could tell Aaron was grinding on it, and then was just like, what if we did a milkman? And we could kind of unpack, well, how you got the milkman, but it went quiet and then was like, yep, that's it. So we had such a great base there that we could then tie in, and then we unpacked why the Milkman made a lot of sense, and to the nostalgia side of it, as well as really what Got Milk's about is the absence of milk. So how could we create an experience that's really iconic when you think of it as it relates to milk in your head when you think of milk, in a way that replaced it with cereal, took over this idea of a milkman and became a cereal man, where everything you would need for a bowl of cereal is there except for the milk, delivered by something that used to be something that delivered milk. So really interesting stories how we got there, but
yeah, it's a real like juggling play on words to some degree, right? Like take the most iconic thing you can think of related to milk in your head, which was a cow and a milkman, and figure out which one of those two has any legs. Not actual legs, but the cow was out. The cow got out real fast in my head.
Yeah.
And then the milkman was left. And you're like, if you took all the milk away from the milkman, what are you left with? This really cool play for General Mills, leading with cereal as the cereal man, and really respecting back again to the nostalgia of the original commercials that were really about the absence of milk and how desperately you needed it, right? The cookie, the brownie, the vending machine that had jammed up with the milk, and if you give somebody a whole bunch of cereal and no milk, that really started to hit home. That's how we landed with the cereal.
It's great when you have the timing. When you can hit that right at the start of a project, then that affords you more length and more runway to really dive into the details and do more research and really build out a design around this campaign, instead of having to spin your wheels on 3 concepts that you're pitching a number of rounds on. When you land a little idea at the start, that's the nugget, and then you get to dream on where that can go.
I think that's
get a better creative.
That's a big win with this client, the way they think and the way they see us and trust us, is that we haven't pitched multiple concepts to them. The concept obviously sways back and forth and derails or takes the wrong exit every once in a while, but we pitch one clear vision. And to your point, the reason that like they are looking at us as the people who should know this, we come back to one really clearly defined idea, which then does allow us to really figure out every touch point, every detail, every, down to the socks, literally, right? The Lucky Charms socks on the milkman was like one of those like perfecto moments that just hit, right? But those take time to get to, right? You're not usually thinking about, what about the socks in round 1?
Right, but they remind me of a lot of the tactics with Giannis, right? It's those details that's really gonna resonate and like land with the consumer and make it authentic. Something like this, and the same with the Athens to Astoria, it can either be really successful, which we, have driven those, but can also fall a little flat if you're not really thinking through those little details and hitting something like this, nostalgia for Gen Z, for our generation, for the generation above us in any different way that we've interacted with Got Milk and cereal brands.
And the authenticity in those, there's so many chances to drop the ball or make a mistake.
Right.
The wrong vehicle would have, killed this pretty early on. The wrong uniform translated into a modern version that takes the heritage of like what the 50s milkman was and makes him a modern person that's still a uniform, but in a different way. Like those details matter. And any point you could drop one of those, the story kind of falls apart, especially when you only have cereal, a truck, and a person. Like you got to get all 3 right.
Yeah, I mean, creating it to be modern, but also not too modern where it's going to lose that nostalgia or almost be negative for someone who's an older generation. That is still a target, of course. We're going to target Gen Z. We still want to get amplification to millennials and other targets. So if you went too far with it, there could be a negative impact. So finding that line, I think, was perfect. That it still resonated, but was enough that felt a little bit more modern and what a milkman would look like, or in our case, a cereal man would look like today. And then once we have that all figured out, it's, all right, then how do we want to put this in market, and how do we want to amplify the story, and where do we want that to happen?
Yeah, so, we have this concept of the cereal man. We knew we wanted him to be kind of the delivery mechanism, but this is really a social content-driven story. So how did we channel that into the social sphere? Yeah, I mean,
at the end of the day, we realized that, even with COVID kind of drove this at the beginning, but at the end of the day, I don't think we would have done anything different. And honestly, I think COVID helped with some of our impact, but we knew we wanted to do some kind of delivery influencer moment. And with influencer marketing, as we all know, it's growing every day, it's changing every day. People are getting accustomed to it. People are getting numb to the idea of celebrities getting product and then sharing about them. It's happening all day, every day. So as we try to push the boundaries on that, we unpacked it and said, let's reverse engineer or decouple it a little bit. what can be really fun is the delivery of the unit or the items versus getting the items themselves. So of course, it's great to give the product. It's cereal, but it's really great to get that product. But at the same time, if we could create a really fun experience that's gonna get people excited to wanna share about it, that's gonna be a win, regardless if you pay for the shareability or not. So we wanted to really come up and show up to the house with excitement and create almost a set of props that our influencers that we targeted could then take and create their own content around. And then we had a cadence of taking that content and suggesting the next person. So there's a really thorough plan put in place between ourselves and the other partners on the project, but of just how to amplify that through. And TikTok was the main area we focused on. Just again, Gen Z, TikTok is the leading platform right now. And then we leveraged TikTok influencers that made sense for that platform that then had some amplification in Instagram, although the ROI was a little bit lower on there. Yeah. But we really wanted to make that a really impactful. And I think, we talked about it before. We kind of went down two paths of, do we want to have a celebrity be the milkman or cereal man, or do we want to let that be agnostic and then show up to influencers' houses and let them make content with props? Let them experience the agnostic cereal person. They can then have fun with it, and then it's got legs for future things. And this one, we went the latter route versus the former, but really interesting and fun. And then with the cadence, and then we preheated it with custom content that showed what the morning of a cereal man would look like, dropping off cereal at someone's house. That then launched on a Friday. We then did the social posts throughout the following week and then amplified it and then got to the results that we got to.
And what were those results? What was the impact?
45 million plus impressions in a couple weeks. So that's what we could measure. Not probably full impressions of things that are offside TikTok, but that's TikTok, Instagram, and some other social platforms. So it's incredible reach.
That's a staggering number, 45
million. Yeah.
And then, of course, those stats and those impressions are really important, but I think that there's also a deeper layer to that and understanding just how people are considering General Mills as a brand and really, like you were referring to earlier, taking them off of the shelf edge and actually applying this brand into young consumers' lives, making them really relevant.
Yeah. It's one of the strategies that they came to us with, again, trying to looking at other work we had done for other brands who lead in that industry, Nike being one of them, at a high reference, knowing they have Wheaties and these other brands, is that sales, stats, social, viral, everything of those is important. What we are trying to do with them primarily is to move them into cultural commerce. It's hard to put an ROI on. There's a cultural commerce with brands like Nike, Jordan, and things like that. Vintage cars, all these things that are covetable. CPG brands are usually not that. This is where they want to go with us, and why we are doing these campaigns through these lenses of activation and experience and immersions to move them from a transaction to a cultural relevance.
And then there is love in the cereal culture. There is a cereal culture. There is, not saying young generations aren't obsessing on cereal as well, but there can be more. There can be more brand lift. And you think about some of the brands, Wheaties wasn't involved in this big G portfolio project, but you put Wheaties up there with a Nike, and just the brand and the love and the be on a Wheaties box is an iconic moment for an athlete. That's a really strong story. So they have some really rich storytelling associated with brands that they can harness and power and stand for those brands and continue to drive love and seep in the culture. Reese's Puff and Travis Scott, it's there and it's happening. Just gotta make sure we're amplifying it and letting people know that these stories and partnerships and collabs exist and that can be amplified.
Yeah, I think there's a real opportunity for brands that, in the past have had a harder time making their way into culture. And I think that there's a huge space for them to fill right now that, maybe there wasn't there without that social reach a decade ago.
Yeah, and I think branding within branding in these experiences happening. We're seeing a lot of it. To be able to promote it, to market it, to sell it, to pitch it, it needs naming, it needs branding. I mean, the coffee company in the Antetokounmpo one, there's a brand within a brand. The barber shop is a brand within a brand. We made Big G's cereal collective. It's not even a General Mills thing. It's specific to this and did the branding, the look. It's how, you have to have a logo to put on the side of the truck. You had to have a badge to put on his hat. You have to have these brands within brands to pull off this mission.
It's that layering of detail and that layering of authenticity and hearkening back to a little bit of their roots with a modern spin that feels really good and does have a lot of traction today with this captive audience. When we hit this during the COVID outbreak, we really did hit this audience that was on their TikToks, and I think we got more views than we might have if it wasn't the case.
Yeah, everyone's hungry for content.
Yeah.
Everybody's getting everything delivered, or has been for the last year, and it will continue to. That's a trend that's not going to go away, even with food. And then, yeah, with a captive audience stuck on their phone, it allowed us to probably get a ton of reach that you don't want to ever say, thank COVID, but COVID helps in that scenario because you just have to meet consumers where they're at that time. And General Mills is doing a great job of putting customer first. It's a real change and pivot for them that's been happening the last couple of years, and they're speaking boldly about it and speaking boldly about creating beautiful brands and really relying on experience and trying to maybe go a little bit more DTC on their own, like Nike's leading the charge on some of that. So it's a really fun brand to be associated with, and one that we hadn't even really talked much about in the last couple of years that we've just been so blessed and lucky to be talking to now, and really cherish the partnership we have with them, and as we continue to grow with them and push the boundaries in other places.
So we've really spent some time digging into each of these projects individually and understanding a lot of the detail behind them. Now I want to put them head to head and really look at them next to each other and really understand some of the just underlying themes there. So we're talking about, Nike's signature basketball line, and we're talking about your morning breakfast cereals, right? Two seemingly really different products. So, it seems like we've actually approached them pretty similarly. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. At the end of the day, comparing these two, the reality is the product was the product. It's not really what we are hearing here, but it's more the story that we developed around the product. So in the case of Giannis, it was really that moment of basically teaching the consumer why Giannis is so great. His story, his love with his family, his brothers, some of his trials and tribulations, young talent, about to be MVP, connecting all that together and tell a cohesive story about that then will amplify the product and do all those other things. So really starting with a story there and then amplifying where that's going to go and create some love around Giannis. It's a ton of shoes in the market, so it's got to be a way to emotionally connect with the consumer that they're going to want to care about him and then hopefully care about wearing his shoes and be even proud to wear his shoes. General Mills, it's the same thing, that there's just trying to build brand love and let people know about this partnership that was really exciting and fun, and creating a story that could resonate with people and drive nostalgia or introduce to a new generation this idea, and really from there amplify out. So for these cases, it was absolutely just led from the center out with this beautiful story around Giannis and this nostalgia piece on General Mills end. But really the thinking is no different on the approach. Now, if we were going to tell a tech story with like a Nike football boot or something along those lines, that's going to be the story that will then resonate with, because that's the passion behind it. It's the tech, it's the advancement. Not saying there wasn't tech in Giannis' shoe, but it's not the hero of what it is. He is the hero.
Right, so in this specific comparison, both of these projects were really based around really rich and layered stories behind the product. So it's leading with that in order to educate and engage with consumers around the product.
Yeah, and create awareness and love from the consumer. And that's exactly what I think we did.
And they both have a nostalgic take and a modern take. And that tension plays really well in people's mind, because everyone has nostalgia and heritage and they look at, but then how do you update it or how do you move it forward? What's the future of heritage in that story? And I think, bringing Giannis back to his roots and where he came from and bringing it to New York, the Coming to America tie-in is really interesting there. And the same with the General Mills of bringing like an icon of the past that's pretty much gone back in a new modern way that tests the waters of people's memories and emotions of it. The reason we do nostalgia is because it's emotional. And can you play with those levers and tweak them? Absolutely. And you can make them, really become more involved, stay involved, like really get them to become brand ambassadors or champions for those brands or those people or those products, far beyond what the price of the product is or whatever.
Sure. I guess adding to that too, like when we think about Giannis and building this story around the product, like, even just looking at the footwear we're all wearing now, like we have such a good example from the past in that in Jordan as a brand. So there's so much of that, story and understanding Jordan as an athlete. How much do you think that carries into, what they're trying to do with something like the Zoom Freak for Giannis?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I think Aaron touched on this, but it's starting with what the story is of that. For Giannis, it was him as an athlete, or what it might be tech, starting with what is the story of that product, and then how do you give life to that, right? And I think for us, it was, again, just really leaning into why would I want another pair of basketball shoes, or what makes this pair different? And it was really who Giannis was as an athlete, right?
Mm-hmm.
And creating that brand awareness of him as an athlete. And that's where Jordan began, right? He was one of the best basketball players ever. And it all started with him. Asterisk. It all started with him starting to, build that on that player and with that brand.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a great marketing study story basically that happened. You could debate where it came from or who did it first, but the man to the brand, right? Like Michael Jordan's the man until he's not playing anymore. You have a real crisis at that point, right? How do you sell shoes anymore?
Yeah.
Translating a man to a brand is crucial to any brand doing anything at the moment. I mean, you've seen Colonel Sanders, Betty Crocker. It could be an athlete, it could be anything, but that transition point is really a challenge to most brands. If you're not on the court or you're not in the kitchen or whatever you did to make you famous, that is hard to continue marketing and selling shoes for 20 more years or cookbooks for 100 more years or whatever. So I think we both played off that in the story of Giannis. The story really is the key, because someday he won't be playing, or he won't be MVP, or he won't be in Milwaukee. But same for our milkman, right? The cereal man. That's a gone thing that we're bringing back in a way that man to the brand drove a lot of those conversations about the milkman of who he really would be, or she. Were they going to be a famous person? Were they going to be an agnostic person that had legs to be anybody they wanted? That story came up in those conversations and really led to making sure that the cereal man could be anybody in the future as opposed to one person.
So let's switch gears and talk about the markets. The markets involved in both of these campaigns were really key parts of telling the story. Of course, in Giannis, very deeply in New York, in General Mills, focused around LA. Can you talk about how these cities played such a big role and why maybe brands are really focused on investing in elevated experiences in key markets?
Yeah, I think the market is key. It's almost like a character in the story. And if we'd have launched Giannis in Miami, it'd have been the Giannis Miami Vice or the Giannis retirement home. But we launched it in SoHo, and SoHo is New York. New York's the heart of basketball, and it's Giannis is coming to America story of his own. So this is very much part of his story, part of the story, and where we wanted to dig in and layer in. So it is basically its own character.
Yeah, and I think for this one specifically, Nike kind of dictated a lot of those markets, right? Those are proven of the consumer that they want to reach. It's a high profile markets, LA, Chicago, New York. Their markets were kind of launching shoes pretty often in. And then for this particular story, it was also a part of Giannis's journey, and there were some other, layering reasons why we chose those markets, or we went big in those markets.
And since we know those markets pretty well, we work in them all the time, we can layer in and we can find the right stories, and we can pull the right threads to tie and connect these initiatives on a deeper level generally.
I think the difference on our end for the General Mills, I think your guys' story was dictated by the city, and that was a predetermined fact. For us, when we talked about, again, we start with the story and what was the best amplification level, and then from there, what's the best city to allow you to do that. LA just organically made sense. I wouldn't say we picked LA because of it happened to be LA, but it was some weather, but also if we want to use TikTok influencers and deliver to their house, it's going to be in LA. So It's a really interesting contrast between we were able to dictate the city based on our execution goals and how we want to amplify. Your creator was dictated by the city that you knew you had to be in, and rightfully so. I mean, it's New York City, and then there's strategy around secondary markets and things we could get into, but that really helped define your story.
Yeah, so in LA was really in our heads, the vision of post-war modern American thriving, like the suburbs, the sunrises, the sunsets, the cul-de-sacs, the peace, the birds chirping. If you could have a moment in American history that was where the milkman would have lived, we imagined it as suburban Los Angeles in the 1950s.
Yeah.
And then it worked out from there. But again, the story drove that. Other realities kind of push and pull those lights in locations sometimes, but the story was the anchor for LA, and that worked out.
Yeah, and I think there are times that New York and LA won't, always make the most sense. Like we sometimes love to go into secondary markets. I think Giannis would have been amazing to go into Milwaukee. Milwaukee doesn't get something like this often, but it was, the story we were telling and, what we were working with our client at the time, New York was the right place for the pinnacle. But I think it's working with the story with the client, just kind of understanding, all of those elements at play, the consumers in each of those markets, and then finding the right place to bring it to life.
And those other options are equally as exciting in a different way, I think, right?
Yeah.
We wouldn't have had like Akron and Cleveland without LeBron, like I think you're right. Like Milwaukee would have been an amazing one to do. It would have had a different story, it would have a different language. I think other non-major market cities have a real bright future now that we can do anything remotely or with social media or in any innovation, we could do stuff anywhere. And I think that's exciting and probably will be something we see more of in the near future.
So it's more about kind of adjusting and tailoring the campaign for the market you're in rather than necessarily having to be in one or two specific cities. It could be anywhere as long as you're staying true to the product, staying true to the brand, and adjusting the story to speak to the people there.
Yeah, because there's a ton of top 500 American companies that are based in other cities. You can start naming them off. Not all top are based in New York and Los Angeles, right? Most of them are based in the Midwest or Upper Midwest or
the two brands we're talking about are
exactly.
in Minneapolis
they're
and
not
Portland.
based in main cities, right? They're based in Minneapolis and Portland, and I think that lends credence to the opportunity to do something like that in a shocking way. And I think it'd be a really exciting challenge to come up with that story and why, and then make it make sense, but then also still hit the ROI, still hit those social numbers, and really blow some minds by doing that would be a great study for a project.
So Giannis, we're really telling the story about him and his heritage story as an athlete. General Mills, we're really focused on telling the story of the partnership with Got Milk. In extending these two brands to encapsulate both of these stories, how do you do that, kind of creating brands within brands while still staying true to kind of the robust brands that General Mills and Nike are?
I think we've found a lot of success in digging into the details and kind of exploring what makes that brand. And like these are large enough brands that we're able to do that and dive in and pull out parts of their history. People know these brands, they're pillar brands, so like it's not a startup brand. And I think that allows us to really have fun and get into those really quirky spots and draw out little threads of fun and humor and just interest to the consumer that's just beyond the logo that you see and
Yeah, and those opportunities come out of the umbrella brand or the parent brand, right? Like you want to take as much as you can from them so that it's not mistaken for another brand, or it's rooted in that brand, and then begin to pick and pull it apart to take General Mills, this massive hundreds of brands across multiple food groups and cultures, and say, Big G's cereal collective is clearly from that, but very specific to, it has a little bit more retro feel, has a little bit more nostalgia. It's clearly rooted in the cereal market and the target audience. I think, the Giannis coffee execution was very similar to that. It's based on the story, his heritage, that city, that market, and then you pull those gems through like open 24/7 and the stats on the coffee bag, and it becomes really like collectible, really authentic, these surprise moments that really extend that experience from a transactional experience to a cultural experience.
So the ability to ladder and layer comes from the fact that General Mills and Nike are huge, robust, really well-established brands that have a look and feel that's known so widely.
And I think it's a fine balance between pushing that boundary and staying rooted in the brand itself. And like in both of them, we've talked about how you need to go so far as to create it like something really authentic and resonate with your consumers, but also not so far that you lose sight of like what you're trying to accomplish with it. So kudos to both of you, because it's quite a challenge to find that like exact spot that we keep hitting that really can bring those two things together to create this immersive experience in retail or online that really can layer in both of those.
Yeah, you want to push that story almost to the edge, right? Because you need that tension and that excitement, that new. We're challenged every project with coming up with something nobody's ever done, or it's new, right? If you did it last campaign, It's got to go. Like, and so it does. This notion of like almost this like sub-branding or like characterizing of these like brands and these products has been very fruitful for us because it really is bringing like a new take or an innovation or a new look at something that exists in a way that we know that we hadn't done before, where it's not requiring like floating something or vape, you know, like all these crazy things that we went through a decade ago, which was like really innovation based and digital based, into more authentic, digestible content that people can really appreciate. It's not shock value anymore. It's just value.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's been a blast to sit and talk through these two projects. I think one we probably haven't looked at for a little bit, and one that's pretty fresh off of, you know, a couple months ago. They both have the same approach. I think it really speaks to our SGK approach of this center out thinking. You know, what is the story? What do we want to drive with the consumer and create love and love for the brand or that launch? And then from there, having the ability to play with execution. Is it going to be a digital thing? Is it IRL? Is it social media? Is it different ways of amplification through social? Being able to then identify that and then build that team around that has been really fun, and hearing the difference between the two, because one was retail-led, one was social-led. We do it in different ways, in different forms every day with these clients and with other clients. So really excited to talk about that and just our strategy of how we approach the work and figure out ways that we can simplify some activities to really amplify and tell the story where we need to and really get maximum impact. So it's been really fun just kind of digging through them, as well as excited to think about who could we be talking about next year that we aren't even thinking about right now, and different ways that we've attacked the market that hopefully are just as innovative as what we just talked through.
Great, thank you so much.